me now with Carol and Ipani here and Elizabeth Doran. And, I'm going to read two passages from the Aeneid, and they're both about burying and not getting buried. And then I want to read from my I don't say translation, but my rendering of verses from the great Gilgamesh material. It's from tablet 12 of the Gilgamesh epic is in the first 11 tablets. Tablet 12 turns out is a fantastic poem that is a Babylonian a translation of a Sumerian poem. It's the Sumerians who invented language, and I don't know what the conjectural date of that poem is, but when I think how ancient the Aeneid seems to me, and then the Gilgamesh far back and far more ancient, and then this marvelous poem back farther than that, it seems to go back to the origins of everybody's worries about who they are and what their cultures are. And I want to start with a passage from Book 11 of the Aeneid. It's after the battle that the Trojans have won, and it's quite clear that Book 12 is coming, and the Trojan triumph, ambiguous triumph at the end of the poem. But this is where the Trojans, after that battle, are burying their dead, and then over there the Latins are burying their dead, and so on. So I want to say something after I've read the passage, or maybe I don't know, about the very opening sentence of it, because it seems to me, as I've said in other readings, definitive about the enterprise of the Aeneid poem in a sense. But anyway, here's the passage, and this is the opening sentence. Aurora rose, spreading her pitying light, and with it bringing back to sight the labors of sad mortality, what men have done, and what has been done to them, and what they must do to mourn. That sentence in the Latin, which I'm not good at reading, but it's Aurora interea mysteris, mortalibus alma, extulerat lucem referens, operatque laboris. And I have a little statement about that. This beautiful two-line sentence with which Virgil's Latin introduces the passage from Book 11 is definitive. It's definitive for us how we are to experience the telling of this heartbreaking scene. It is also, I believe, the definitive declaration of how to read the whole continuing enterprise of the poem, the account of what men have done and what has been done to them and what they must do to mourn, here and in every episode of the work, the varieties of interpretation of that verb to do in the present and past and future and so on. The beginning of the Aeneid Virgil announces definitively what the task of the poem, as well as the task that Aeneas set out on, is to do. So formidable the task of building Rome, and it doesn't in any way denigrate that great sentence to say that the formulation, what men have done and what has been done to them and what they must do to mourn, is beneath it and embraces it, in a sense that his subject matter is not only the formidable task of building Rome and his account of it, but what it is in human history and in every culture, in a sense, what it is that we're all about. And so that's my statement. Aurora rose, spreading her pitying light, and with it bringing back to sight the labors of sad mortality, what men have done and what has been done to them, and what they must do to mourn. King Tarchon and Father Aeneas together upon the curving shore caused there to be wooden funeral pyres constructed, and to which the bodies of their dead were brought and placed there in accordance with the customs of their countries. The black pitch smoke of the burning of the bodies arose up high and darkened the sky above. 3 times, in shining armor, the grieving warriors circled the burning pyres. 3 times on horseback, ululating, weeping as they rode. You could see how teardrops glistened on their armor, the clamor of their sorrowing voices, and the dolorous clang of trumpets rose together as they threw into the melancholy fires spoils that had been stripped from the Latins, helmets and decorated swords, bridles of horses, and glowing chariot wheels, and with them also shields and weapons of their own familiar comrades, which had failed to keep them alive. Bodies of beasts were thrown into the fire, cattle and bristleback swine brought from surrounding fields to be sacrificed to the god of death. And all along the shore, the soldiers watched the burning of the bodies of their friends and could not be turned away until the dewy night changed all the sky and the stars came out. Over there, where the Latins were, things were as miserable as this. Innumerable scattered funeral pyres, many bodies hastily buried in hastily dug up earth, and many others picked up from where they fell when they were slain and carried back to the fields which they had plowed and tilled before the fighting, or back into the city where they came from. Others were indiscriminately burned, unarmed, and so without ceremony or honor. The light of the burning fires was everywhere. On the 3rd day, when the light of day came back to show the hapless scene, they leveled out what was left of the pyres and separated what was left of the bodies, of the bones, now cold and among cold ashes, and covered over the ashes and the bones I should say at this point that part of my enterprise in translating these things is the meter iambic pentameter, and that I'm trying to get heard throughout the poem, and how in some lines it itself is definitive and covered over the ashes and the bones. Then the second passage is from the great book 6 of the Aeneid, when Aeneas has come finally to Italy, to Cumae, and is seeking to find a way to enter into the underworld in order to find the shade of his father, who had, on their journey, had died recently in Sicily on their way. And the passage that follows is about Aeneas's descent into the underworld. From here there is a road which leads to where the waters of Tartarian Acheron are, and where a bottomless whirlpool, thick with muck, heaves and seethes and vomits mire into the river Cocytus. Here's the dread boatman who keeps these waters, frightful in his squalor. Charon, the gray hairs of his unkempt beard depending from his chin, his glaring eyes on fire, his filthy mantle hanging down by a loose knot from his shoulders. All by himself, he manages the sails, and with his pole conveys the dead across in his dark boat. He's old, but being a god, old age is young. A vast crowd, so many, rush to the riverbank. Women and men, famous great-hearted heroes, the life in their hero bodies now defunct. Unmarried boys and girls, sons whom their fathers had to watch being placed on the funeral pyre, as many as the leaves of the forest that, when autumn's first chill comes, fall from the branches, as many as the birds that flock into the land from the great deep, when the season turning cold has driven them over the seas to seek the sun. They stood beseeching on the riverbank, yearning to be the first to be carried across, stretching their hands out toward the farther shore. But the stern ferryman, taking only this one or this other one, pushes the rest away. Aeneas cries out, excited by the tumult, "O Virgin, why are they crowding at the riverbank? What is it that the spirits want? What is it that decides why some of them are pushed away and others sweep across the livid waters. The aged priestess thus, Anchises' son, true scion of the gods, these are the pools of the river Cocytus, and this the Stygian marsh, whose power it is to make the gods afraid not to keep their word. All in this crowd are helpless because their bodies have not been covered over. The boatman that you see is Charon. Those who are being carried across with him are they who have been buried. It is forbidden to take any with them across the echoing waters that flow between the terrible riverbanks, who have not found a resting place for their bones. Restlessly, to and fro along these shores, they wander, waiting for 100 years. Not until after that, the longed-for crossing. Waiting not only to find a resting place, but so that their story, there's the human enterprise of their story, might be finally over and recognized as so. And then from per second. I've got the text a little mixed up here. 1 second. And this is Aeneas's descent into the underworld. They've come to Cumae, and this is where Aeneas, grieving, cries. They give their reins to the fleet, and together they get across to the shores of Euboean Cumae, where they turn their ships about, their prows seaward, and align the curved sterns all along the beaches. The teeth of their angers fasten them where they are. And then the young men eagerly leap from the ships onto the shores of Hesperia at last, some of them searching for flint because they know the seeds of fire are hidden there. Some ravage the woods for the hiding places of game. Some look for new freshwater streams and find them. But pious Aeneas seeks the hill where Phoebus Apollo sits enthroned in his temple, near which there is the enormous cavern, the secret place of the dread Sibyl, into whose being the Delphic seer breathes a soul and mind that are the telling of what it is that is going to come to pass. I made a mistake when I read the other passage first, because that passage of Charon is subsequent to this. I just got mixed up in a sense. I hope you'll hear it as it goes. This is the descent into the underworld itself. And Virgil, terrified by the story that he's going to tell, and calling to the reader about the uncertainties of the telling, in a sense, and the ambition of the enterprise, and the reverential panic, in a sense, in the voice as he speaks it. You gods, who rule the kingdoms of the spirits, you tongueless shades, you phlegethon and chaos, you silent spreading regions of the dark, by the favors of the gods, may I, unharmed, be teller of the things that I have heard, and what is wrapped in the darkness here below. And then, in the lonely gloom of night, two figures walk through the empty rooms of Dis's empty kingdom, as if upon a path beneath the uncertain, meager light of a moon, almost not there, at a time when Jupiter has hidden the sky in darkness, and black night has taken away from all things all the colors that they had. Just at the innermost entrance to the end of the entrance court, just at the place where Orcus's jaws are open, there's grief. There's unrelenting cares where they have placed their beds. There's ashen-faced disease, sad age. There's fear. There's hunger, begetter of crime. There's destitution, shapes terrible to look at. There's death, and his brother sleep, and guilty desires. And on the other side of the open door, there's war, dealer of death, and there's the iron cells of the Furies, and insane discord, with bloody ribbons in her snaky hair. In the midst, there is an enormous, shadowy elm tree, spreading its arms, and false dreams clinging under, every single leaf of the foliage, so men say, and also many forms of monstrous creatures, centaurs stabled at the threshold there, and biform Scyllas, and Briareus, 100-handed, 50-headed, and the striding, hissing beast of Lerna, the chimera breathing fire, and harpies, gorgons, and he, the three-bodied shade, Aeneas, trembling, terrified at the sight, unsheathed his sword and turns its edge against them. And he would, had not his sage companion told him that these were bodiless, empty images of life, have slashed at fleeting shadows with his sword. And then, if you don't mind, I'm going to reread the passage that should have followed this because because I misplaced it when I started to read, but I think it's important. Apologize for that. From here there is a road which leads to where the waters of Tartarian Acheron are, and where a bottomless whirlpool thick with muck heaves and seethes and vomits mire into the river Cocytos. Here is the dreadful boatman who keeps these waters, frightful in his squalor, care on the grey beards of his unkempt beard, the grey hairs of his unkempt beard depending from his chin, the glaring eyes on fire, his filthy mantle hanging by a loose knot from his shoulders, all by himself. He manages the sails, and with his pole conveys the dead across in his dark boat. He's old, but being a god, old age is young. A vast crowd, so many rush to the riverbank. Women and men, famous great-hearted heroes, the life in their hero bodies now defunct, unmarried boys and girls, sons whom their fathers had to watch being placed on the funeral pyres, as many as the leaves of the forest that when autumn's first chill comes, fall from the branches, as many as the birds that flock into the land from the great deep, when the season, turning cold, has driven them over the seas to seek the sun. They stood beseeching on the riverbank, yearning to be the first to be carried across, stretching their hands out toward the farther shore. But the stern ferryman, taking only this one or this other one, pushes the rest away. Aeneas cries out, excited by the tumult, "O Virgin, why are they crowding at the river? What is it that the spirits want? What is it that decides why some of them are pushed away and others sweep across the livid waters?" The aged priestess thus, Anchises' son, true scion of the gods, "These are the pools of the river Cocytos, and this is the Stygian marsh, whose power it is to make the gods afraid not to keep their word. All of this crowd are helpless because their bodies have not been covered over. The boatman that you see is Charon. Those who are being carried across with him are they who have been buried. It is forbidden to take any with him across the echoing waters that flow between these terrible river banks, who have not found a resting place for their bones. Restlessly to and fro along the shore, they wander, waiting for 100 years. Not until after that, the longed-for crossing." I wanted to repeat it to put it in its proper place, but also because that passage about the birds and coming and so on is Virgil's own quote from lines in his great previous translation, the Georgics, and which he quotes when he's telling of Orpheus's descent into the underworld in order to try to rescue his wife Eurydice, and down there and so on. And so when the possibility of this and the beauty of this daring to come into the underworld and so on is happens as if it's an event in the seasons, and so on, as if it's inevitable that the environment that we live in a sense, and the creatures who we are, and that we share with the birds and the seas and the storms and so on, and the conditions of our limitations, in a sense, are acted out in that scene when Eurydice, when Orpheus the greatest singers, the original singer, in a sense, goes to the underworld, and his task of bringing back Eurydice, his wife, is doomed to failure out of that very love which he feels for her, which causes him to do the forbidden act of looking back at her as he takes her from there, and so on. And I think this is related to the passage that in the Aeneas goes on. Aeneas in the underworld has gone to the blessed fields in which the shade of his father lives, and he has been so thrilled by what he's seen there that he himself can't think of going back into the world of the limitations of bodies, in a sense. And he says to his father, when he sees some of the dead drinking from the river Lethe, and so on, and preparing to go back into the world of their bodies and the limitations of the heartbreaking limitations of their selves, in a sense. And he says to his father, "Oh, Father, is it thinkable that any spirits want to go back from this, the Elysian fields, from this to the upper world, and again into the prisons of bodies? Why do these poor things long so to go back to the light up there?" Aeneas answers, saying, "My son, I'll tell you." And he tells him, in its order, all the truth. There is a spirit that breathes and moves within and nurtures the earth and sky and the ocean's wide savannas and the bright sphere of the moon and Titan's star, the sun. Intelligence moves through all there is, all things there are, and they are constituted by it. From this come all the races and the kinds of men and all the other beings. It is the life of those that fly with wings and those strange creatures that swim beneath the marbled waters of the sea. It burns with its own pure fire in all those beings until the mortality of their bodies clogs and inhibits it. They fear and they desire, they grieve and they delight, and in the shadows and the blindnesses of what imprisons them, their bodies, the light's obscured. And more than that, when they come here, their souls are tainted still with faults that are so deep inhibiting, and so corroding that they have to be punished to erase these faults from them. For some, it is to be suspended upon the winds. For others, to be washed through with flooding waters. For others, it is to be subjected to eviscerating fire, until at last their souls are purified and purged. This must for each of us be undergone, and then at last, when the time comes round, we are sent to Elysium. A few of us here remain, in possession of the blessed fields. But after 1,000 years, those others you see are summoned by the god to drink from the river Lethe, so that in utter forgetfulness, willingly, they will go back into their bodies. And thus in this passage, I think Virgil, among other things, invents Wordsworth and the great ode intimations of immortality, in a sense, and that sense of that definitive limitations in our experience that guarantees that the so difficult the task of getting to Rome, building Rome, is compromised in a sense by our very humanities and the nature in which we live. I'd like to read, if I can, from Tablet 12 of the Gilgamesh material. I call my work on the Gilgamesh not a translation because I don't know Babylonian. God knows I don't know Sumerian. So I don't call it a translation in a sense. I worked from the word for word work of scholars in English, led by the great William Moran, who was an Acadian scholar at Harvard, whom I knew and who got me into this. This is a passage from Tablet 12, the poem that is a close, by a miracle we know, the scholars know it, that they must have found a Sumerian tablet in the sense that, so that from whom they learned writing, but Sumerian is a totally different language from Babylonian, in the sense its code was not found until the 20th century, in fact, but the Babylonians knew it. And it's a close reading of that poem, and I will read some parts of it in a sense. Gilgamesh is the speaker at the opening of it. The drumstick and the drum and drumstick of the carpenter's house, where the carpenter's daughter was, and the carpenter's wife and daughter were like my mother and sister. The drum and drumstick that had fallen down through a hole in the nether world, into the nether world, out of my sight, down through a hole in the floor. Who will bring back my drumstick from down there? Who will bring back my drum from the nether world? Enkidu, who was the servant of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh the king and the great builder of Uruk. Enkidu in this poem was his servant, and also, as the poem makes clear, his lover later. Enkidu heard what Gilgamesh was saying and said, his servant then to Gilgamesh, I will bring the drumstick back from below. I will bring back the drum from the nether world. Gilgamesh heard the promises of Enkidu, and with these words he thus admonished him, if you go down to the nether world for me, listen to what I tell you about your going. Do not put on clean clothes when you go down there, or they will know you come down there a stranger. Do not anoint your body with fragrant oil. The fragrant oil will cause them to gather about you like flies. Carry no staff or bow as you go down there, or startled up,
the spirits will flutter around you. Do not wear shoes when you go to the house of the dead. Let not your step be heard on that booming floor. Refrain from kissing the wife your heart has loved. Refrain from striking the wife your heart has hated. Refrain from kissing the son who was your heart has. I'm sorry, my eyes give me problems sometimes. Your heart has and do not strike the son your heart has hated, and do not strike the son your heart has shunned, or you will be seized and held by the cry of the dead. Naked, the goddess mother lies in hell. Naked, Ninurta's mother lies exposed. The holy garment has fallen from her shoulders. Bared are the breasts of the mother, Ereshkigal. Then Enkidu went down to the nether world, not heeding the admonishments of the king. He wore clean clothes when he went down to the house of the dead, and so they knew he came down from there a stranger. He anointed his body with fragrant oils, and they collected like flies, attracted by the fragrance. He carried his staff and bow with him where he went. Startled, the spirits fluttered all around him. The sounds of the shoes he wore were heard in that place. The echoing floor of the house of the dead resounded. He did not refrain from kissing the wife he loved. He did not refrain from hitting the wife he hated. He embraced and kissed the son who was dear to him, and did not refrain from striking the hated son. And so the cry of the dead seized him and held him. Naked, the goddess mother lies in hell. Naked, Ninurta's mother lies exposed. The holy garment fallen from her shoulders. Bare are the breasts of the mother, Ereshkigal. The cry of the dead seized him and held him himself. Namkar, the demon, did not seize and hold him. Ashkas, the fever demon, did not seize him. Nergal, pitiless viceroy, did not seize him. It was the cry of the dead that seized and held him. He did not fall in battle. It was the cry, the nether world itself, it was that seized him. Ereshkigal, the queen it was who held him. Gilgamesh grieved for the death of Enkidu. Grieving, he went to the house of the god Enlil, and then he asked the god Enlil to intercede for him, and fails, and he goes to the god Sin of the moon, and fails, and then finally he goes to the god Ea, who's a very ambiguous god who is in some sense the creation itself. He's the god of the fresh water under the salt waters of the sea, and so on. And he goes to the edge of Apsu, the abyss, to the god Ea. Oh, Father Ea, into the nether world my drum has fallen through a hole. My drumstick fell through a hole down in the world below. The cry of the nether world has seized my servant Enkidu, whom I sent to bring me back the drum and drumstick that fell down through a hole in the floor of the upper world. Namtar, the demon, did not seize him and hold him. Ashkan, the fever demon, did not seize him. Nergal's pitiless viceroy did not seize him. It was the cry of the dead that seized and held him. He did not fall in battle. It was the cry, the nether world itself, it was that seized him. Ereshkigal, the queen it was who held him. The god of the abyss heard him and said, and what he said, and interceded for the grieving king. He said to Nergal, king of the netherworld, open a hole in the roof of the netherworld, so Enkidu may rise up like a vapor out of the netherworld into the upper. Nergal obeyed the voice of Ea the god. The hole in the floor of the upper world was open. The spirit of Enkidu, a puff of breath, came forth from the netherworld into the upper. Then Gilgamesh and Enkidu, companions, tried to embrace and kiss one another. Companions. I'm sorry, my eyes are towards one another. They spoke these words. Now tell me how it is in the netherworld. I will not tell you. If I told you how it is in the netherworld, the arrangement of things, you would sit down and weep because I told you. Now tell me how it is that although I may sit down and weep because of what you tell me. So Enkidu told him the way it is down there. The vermin eat my body. The vermin eat my body that once made Gilgamesh, the companion, rejoice to touch, as if it was old clothes, filthy, discarded. The vermin eat the body of Enkidu. Then Gilgamesh cried woe and fell to the ground because of the things that Enkidu was telling. After a time, he further questioned him about the way it is among the dead. Have you seen down there the man who has no sons? I have seen the sonless man in the netherworld. How is it with the man who has one son? I have seen the man. He sits there by the wall and weeps. Have you seen the man down there who has two sons? He sits on 2 bricks and has some bread to eat. How is it with the man who has 3 sons? He drinks from the water skin his sons have brought. Have you seen the man down there who has 4 sons? His heart rejoices as the heart rejoices of a farmer with 4 asses who 4 asses yoked to his cart. How is it with the man who has 5 sons? They treat him in the nether world as if he were a scribe of the court, dispenser of justice. Have you seen down there the man who has 6 sons? His heart rejoices as the heart rejoices of one who drives his plow in a rich field. How is it with the man who has 7 sons, as if he were a companion of the gods? He sits upon a throne and listens to music. Have you seen the man who fell from the mast and drowned? I have seen the drowned man in the nether world. How is it with the man who suddenly died? They bring pure waters to him from on his couch. Have you seen in the nether world the famous warrior, he who fell on the battlefield in glory? The grieving parents raise up the head of their son. The mourning wife grieves on the couch of death. And he whose corpse was thrown away, unburied, he wanders without rest through the world down there. The one who goes to the nether world without leaving behind him
any to mourn for him? Garbage is what he eats. In the netherworld, no dog would eat the food he has to eat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you very much.
Sorry I made that mistake in the order.
No, this was beautiful. I didn't get a chance to read it again. Well, thank you. This is, she was reading and explaining what's going on, and this sense that, in a way, Virgil invented Wordsworth, and so you had this association with the oaths and the intimations of immortality, this sense of finalities. And I been also thinking about the importance of David's own, not the renderings, but also his own poetry. And one of the things I had tried that struck me, that I tried to capture, I just want to read it as a way of paying homage and to this dear man. And the foreword to this thing, that I have found that there is in Ferry's poems a certain way of managing the breakdown of our various powers and affections, so that all is not lost, so that instead of a vanishing, there is an ascension into another kind of clutchable glory. The replacement echoes even more tantalizing than the originals. A lapsed awareness or a lapsed memory will often come back with new life, as if the poems were saying that we are not yet done with our days, that something else is around the corner. I'll illustrate my little homage to a big man, a dear friend. We're not yet done with our days. Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great, maybe for 4 minutes, if you have any questions or words of wisdom. Whether if you have any questions for him, his work and what he's working on now and things like that. Just a few more minutes, and then we can let him have a little wine. Yeah.
This is not a question, it's just an observation. I really liked hearing those two passages next to each other, the two descents to the underworld, and I guess what made such an impression on me, so poignant, is the incredible importance in both those underworlds of how are those who survive us, how they treat us, is of such crucial importance, and that made a big impression on me. The vital importance of those sons or parent, whoever's left behind to bury or.
I think in that passage from the great Sumerian poem, the liturgical rhythms of the passage, the repetitions, and when the repetitions and the story, in some sense, is telling, you might say, a story of failure, just as in some sense, the task of in the Aeneid of saying, so formidable the task of building Rome, and so on and so on, is in some way always compromised, and in some sense always a failure. The story of my book about Wordsworth is entitled "The Limits of Mortality," in a sense that nevertheless the repetitions, the sort of ceremonious liturgical sound itself is like a burial in some way, and that in some way is as I think Ifani was saying, is a reassurance in some sense or others, in these works that the power of the telling in both these both these poems doesn't erase the limiting truth that they're telling, but in some way or other it celebrates it. It celebrates the sorts of stories of who we are, what men have done, and what has been done to them, and what they must do to mourn.
The stories the idea of stories keeps getting spoken about again and again and again, that the shades that are waiting to be brought across to finish the stories, the unfinished stories. It seems to be all about stories.
Can
Yeah,
you,
well,
I
yeah,
got my
so-
ear things, but they had no batteries in them.
I'll say it louder. There's so much about stories.
Yeah, sorry.
Stories in both of these,
Yes.
particularly in the Aeneid. His story, all of the dead, their stories,
Yes,
waiting to tell it,
yes,
waiting to
Yes.
resolve something
Yeah.
important in the telling.
yeah. Like Virgil in that other passage say, "You phlegethon, you chaos. Tell me how to tell this." In some way, it's both a
And Gilgamesh, tell me.
and
tell me.
that statement of Virgil's in going down to the underworld is also saying, "I'm so scared of going to the underworld with Aeneas. Aren't I brave?" And isn't this telling of the story going to be great? In a sense, even though it's telling a story that might be said is a story of, when Aeneas gets the word about the prophecy of Rome, he's sent up back into the world through the gate of false dreams. And yet, his getting down there and his trying to do it is celebrated in the poem and in the rhythms of the poems.
I'm only standing because my back can't stand the chair anymore. I couldn't sit in the chair anymore because of my back.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not,
He doesn't have a question.
I don't have a question.
Oh.
Oh, you want a question?
No.
All right, if you can find in Virgil, the phrase "being a god,"
Yeah.
what you have following it leaves it as a hanging participle, and you will want to fix that by the next minute. You have a hanging participle.
Yeah. Well, there was raising the question about being a god, in the book. Yeah. Well, that's a point. That's good. Well, anyway,
That's meant as a useful and helpful
yeah.
comment.
Thank you. Yeah.
If any,
Yeah.
I just want to say something as a comment, maybe hopefully speaking for a lot of people here, that so many of us have been listening to you for so many years, and in my reading life and in my mind, your voice has replaced the voice whatever voice was in my head before as I read these works. And I feel like the gift of being able to read these in your translation is one thing. The gift for those of us who've been able to hear you read it in person is a whole other thing. We have.
Shall we quit?
Yeah.
A glass of wine.
It's you know, that wonderful write-up in Poetry Magazine about the cumulative power of David's voice. So much work that's been there, but the power keeps building, one after the other. No shouting, you know, but the cumulative power of this. No. Thank you. We'll be glad to sign some books. Can sign some books for you guys. You come forward.
Up against the wall, we'll have room.
Oh, yes.